Welcome to another edition of Thought Leaders Live, where we talk with thought leaders in business, life, and all points in between. Today, we're talking with Bruce Eckfeldt, a strategic coach and exit advisor specializing in helping founders and CEOs of 10 to $100 million companies scale profitably and exit successfully. Bruce, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, Greg. It's a pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, sure. So, Bruce, why don't we start out? Tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your journey, and your
Yeah.
company.
Yeah. I always start. I did not plan on being a business person originally. I was originally an architect. I did 2 degrees of architecture at McGill University in Montreal. Um, Kind of got into the architecture profession. I was always interested in fine arts and sciences and engineering. So architecture was kind of this natural place for me from when I was kind of thinking about my profession and what I wanted to do kind of when I grew up, I guess. Um, and then fairly quickly realized the actual practice of architecture wasn't nearly as interesting as kind of the study and kind of the theory of architecture. And so I got a little bit bored, and I was very into 3D modeling at the time. So I kind of leaned into the computer, and internet was kind of getting started late 90s. And so I kind of pivoted and focused more on kind of the computer and the computer as a design tool. And then I ended up getting recruited to New York. I was in Minnesota at the time, recruited to New York to work with Interactive Media, really applying these 3D modeling capabilities to these kind of very high-end touchscreen kiosks. They were doing some CD-ROM work at the time. Internet was kind of coming out. So I got more into technology and media, and internet took off. I got very involved in kind of digital business and digital business strategy, kind of worked more on the engagement management and strategy side of the house, really kind of figuring out how to apply these tools to businesses. And then I ended up founding a tech company back in 2002, Lean Agile consulting software development firm. So we did product development and advisory services for agile transformations in these mid-market companies. Scaled that, put it on the Inc. 500 list a couple of times, and sold that in 2013. And since then have been primarily focused on advising CEOs, leadership teams on strategy and leadership development. So I kind of always joke, half my job is business model, half my job is therapy, but it's working with them on like how do we align around a clear strategy for how we're going to win in the market, really figuring out our core customer, what are the operational capabilities we need, what's our differentiation strategy, and then building out leadership team, organizational design, and then scaling, figuring out how do we deploy capital, raise capital, deploy capital, or drive growth through profits. And then the last 4 or 5 years have worked with several companies. I'm preparing them for exits. So a lot of what I do now is kind of exit strategies, figuring out, okay, where are we likely going to exit this business, and therefore what kind of business do we need, and then reverse engineering that to what kind of business should we scale, meaning where do we, what should we do next given where the company is. So a lot of it is kind of thinking through long-term strategy to kind of drive short-term strategy and operations.
I always hear business owners say things like, especially if they've sold their business, yeah, I started this business, scaled it, I sold it, and it just like comes out that quickly, and
Yeah.
it's very casually mentioned and humbly, sure. Um, but I'm always thinking, like many mere mortals out here who have not scaled and grown a business, that was no easy task, right? I mean, there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in that process, correct?
Yeah, I mean, my guess is most people kind of gloss over it. A because it's complicated, and B because there's probably a lot of PTSD there that they don't want to relive. But yeah, I mean, it's a journey, and every journey is a little different. But there's often kind of themes, patterns, especially for founders. I find like I do most of my work. Probably 80% of my work are founders, and usually first-time founders. So going from, either I'm going to start a business, or I would say the majority of the cases of mine and the majority of cases I work with, it's like, oh my gosh, I have a business. Like it wasn't even kind of an intentional process. It was like you end up with a project and you got to hire some people, and that leads to another project. So you hire a few more, and then you've got pretty soon it's like, oh my gosh, I'm running a business. And so
Yeah.
it's, there is a lot of this kind of catching up, both with the business, trying to, oh my gosh, I need to get ahead of this, or I need to kind of figure out what I'm doing here. And I call it accidental leadership. All right. So people that end up in these leadership positions that wasn't what they were planning. And, I think there's always kind of natural leadership qualities, in people that end up in that situation, but it's not formalized and it's not something they have a lot of thought around, or a lot of structure or planning, or a lot of confidence. It certainly was my case. I mean, part of what I had to figure out is actually, okay, what do I know and what do I not know? How do I educate myself? How do I, learn from what I'm doing to kind of build experience and capacity? Um, but it's always a little bit of just either staying one step ahead, or trying to stay not more than one step behind the company in terms of as things begin to scale and grow. So you're kind of, sometimes it's like you have a tiger by the tail, and you're just trying to hold on. And you go through losing big clients and having to figure out what to do, and laying people off and hiring people back, and then figuring out how to deal with sometimes it's challenges and sometimes it's success. Right, success can often be the biggest challenge in a lot of these businesses, whether it's from a cash point of view, or I've got to hire, I've got to maintain quality, I've got to deliver on the projects that I've sold. Right, like there's always challenges, and so there's always a bit of a journey there.
Yeah, I'm sure some of those challenges are more welcome than others. You mentioned, though, that staying one step ahead. So that kind of leads us into this first thing we want to talk about why thinking about your exit now, accidental leaders and other more intentional leaders, why thinking about your exit now, even if it's years away, or even if you haven't even considered it,
Yeah.
makes you a better CEO today.
hmm Yeah, I mean, there's two reasons. One is I find people actually don't think big enough. Like usually when we're doing planning, they're saying, "Oh, well, we want to grow like 10%, 15%, 20% a year. I'll be happy with that." And the challenge there is that's not really going to drive change in the organization. And usually what I'm doing is pushing founders to think much bigger. And the reason is, if you start to think bigger, it becomes easier to figure out what do you need to focus on, because it starts taking certain things off the table. You can no longer kind of do all these side projects, or kind of spend time and money on these things that are going to, they're going to help you grow a little bit, but they're really not going to get you where you want to be. If you push it and you really think, okay, how do we really think bigger about this, it becomes a forcing function in terms of what do we need to prioritize and what do we really need to work on. So I think there's one reason that really thinking about this exit, thinking about the future, 5 to 10 years out, where is this really going to be? What would really be a big win? And then using that as a tool to really force strategy, force decisions, force prioritization. Uh, you know, choosing the things that I really need to spend time and energy on. Because a lot of businesses, there's lots of things they could do, right? There's 5, 10, 15 avenues they could go down, but we got to pick, and because we can't go down all of them. And so by thinking really big, it takes a lot of those options off the table. So that now it's actually a clear path. So I think that's one reason. The other reason is I think that particularly with founders, first time founders, they get very wrapped up in the business from an identity point of view. Like the business is them, they are the business. It's really they put so much time and energy into this thing that their egos and identities kind of fuse with the business, and that ends up becoming a problem, not only long term but short term too, right? Like you end up kind of losing yourself, I think, at some level in this business. And so by contemplating an exit, it forces you to think about, well, what is this business outside of me, and what am I outside of the business? What do I want to do? What kind of life do I want to live? What kind of impact do I have? What else do I want to do besides this business? And a lot of times, especially because this often is not a strategic choice. Like you didn't, 10 years ago, or where you were kind of coming out of college and you're like, yeah, I'm going to start a business and this is what I'm going to do. And you end up kind of in this accidentally. And so you end up having this problem, like figuring out what are you outside of it. And so by thinking about an exit, you start to figure out, okay, yeah, what would I want to do outside, post an exit? And that actually starts giving me some ideas of, well, what should I be doing now outside of my business to help, make sure that I'm maintaining, my relationships, my sense of self, other interests, hobbies that I have, diversifying who I am. And so by really thinking about the exit, it helps them start to identify those things, and they can actually start working on things now. And so it helps just manage a little bit of that ego kind of being too woven into the business from an ego and identity point of view. Practically, I mean, the thing by thinking about exits, we can start to figure out, okay, what the type of exit you're going to have. Is it going to be strategic? Is it going to be financial? Are you going to hand it over to management? Is there a second generation? Right? These things actually do start leading then certain types of companies we want to create. Like, what kind of company do we want to build? Meaning, what kind of company do we need to have a successful exit in that way? And now actually gives us some ideas about what should we be focusing on in terms of what do we actually scale and how much should we scale. In some cases, like, that exit's not going to look that attractive unless we get to a certain size or a certain revenue or a certain client base. So we really need to know, like, how do we get there? But it gives it a little bit more some guardrails and some direction to what we're doing.
So I would think that when you're coming in, the business is established in the terms of, in the sense that they have customers, they have a pretty specific thing that they're selling or a service. And so then you can kind of get into some more of those aspirational things that you're talking about. Is that the case? When you say what kind of company do you want to be? I mean, I think we all have ideas of what we want to do, but sometimes, the marketplace doesn't cooperate with that.
Yeah.
Are these companies more or less along that path where, yeah, they've got something really good going on, and now it's like, where do we take it to the next step?
Yeah, generally I say they're kind of through that kind of market fit phase, right? Like, they found a market, they have some kind of product or service that solves some kind of problem for a customer who's willing to spend money on it, right? Like, they have that kind of basic mechanics figured out. They're usually profitable, right, at some level, or they have a clear that they can be profitable on a project or a kind of line of business basis, even if they're not generating free cash as a company, right? Because they're reinvesting and stuff. We could make that profitable if that's what we wanted to do in the moment. So they're usually at that phase. Usually the challenge is often they haven't really figured out how to scale
Okay.
that business. So they can solve it for a couple of dozen clients, but when they think about doing it for a couple hundred clients, right, that becomes a problem. And usually the big areas are, how do we generate more leads, right? Like, we can generate X number of leads doing these things, but they kind of cap out. And usually theirs, they haven't really figured out the differentiation, right? Like, it's very kind of word of mouth, and they're kind of able to kind of build the business, in a kind of a little bit of an ad hoc basis, but they haven't really figured out how to systemize lead generation, and they haven't really figured out their positioning in the market. And then operations. They haven't really kind of figured out how to standardize operations for delivery. And so, usually what I'm doing is helping align a leadership team, right? They're usually at the point where they now have a couple of functional leaders, right? They're kind of working together as a team now. It's no longer just the founder who's like driving everything. So we really got to get that team together and figure out, okay, where is the real opportunity? Where can we really differentiate in the market? How do we really drive profitable delivery? And then how do we start to think about expanding the delivery organization itself? So, yeah, I mean, they tend to be 10 million is kind of a number that I use a lot, which, kind of shows that, hey, we're generating money. And if you're generating 10 million, there's definitely profit opportunity in there if you're not making it currently. And I certainly deal with some earlier stage companies that are well-funded or, unique situations. But I find that that's kind of that break into, all right, we're not struggling to figure out how we make money or how, what is the problem we're solving. It's like, we're solving it for X number of people, and we want to do it with 10X number of people.
You mentioned the getting the mechanism going, like on marketing to scale that. And
Mhm.
that to me seems like that would just have incredible value
Yeah.
just from a marketing perspective. You you talked a little bit in the description that you wrote for the show about
Mhm.
really talking about the leadership and operational systems that buyers actually value and how to build them.
Mhm.
What are some of those leadership and operational systems that buyers are looking for?
Yeah. So there's a couple different types of buyers, and different types of buyers are going to look at this a little bit differently. They buy different kinds of companies for slightly different types of reasons. So if we just kind of bucket it into two big ones of what I call financial buyers, which are basically funds or people that basically have money that are looking to use that money to generate more profits, leverage that money to buy an asset that they see can generate profits in the short term, I'll say 5 to 7 years. And in the two big ways they're going to generate cash is free cash, right? They see the ability of this business will throw off 10-20% margin as free cash, which they can use as a cash flow, or they can scale the business and a combination of both scaling revenues but also scaling the valuation, either through continuing to kind of hone the strategy and the operations, or in some cases just making it bigger. If you're dealing with a $10-15 million business, that same business model, you get it up to $30-40 million, and the valuation is just going to be bigger because it's a bigger business. No other kind of fundamentals changes to it. So financial buyers, private equity, things like that are going to be looking at this from a fairly financial focus. So they're going to be looking at, what's the addressable market? Can we scale that, right? Is there more market to be had? Looking at leadership and operations, right? Do we have capacity here? Or is there a clear way in which we can hire more people or, raise capital for production, right? Like they have a fairly focused analysis of scaling the company, scaling the financial, scaling profit that they can get some kind of return, either on a cash flow or on a secondary sale point of view. So that's all the financial stuff. Strategics are a little different and a little more interesting in that they're looking for underlying assets and capabilities that they could leverage, usually in some other business that they have. They could bolt on, they could stitch them together in such a way where they could see synergistic value, right? So there's the 1 + 1 = 3 kind of opportunities. I buy a company that has a technology, and maybe it's a $30 million company that's selling to, say, 100 customers. Well, a company that has 1,000 of those same types of customers can buy that company and literally day two flip it around and start selling this technology to 900 other companies that they have. So they have either market access or market opportunity, or vice versa. I'm a bigger company, I have a product, and you have a strategic customer base or a location or something about the customers that you serve that would allow us to generate significant more value. Combine those things, we can generate more cash, and therefore, it becomes a more valuable company that maybe then gets sold. But those are a little tricky because it's much more of a dovetailed fit. And sometimes we don't even know why the buyer is buying the company. They may have some plan or some idea that they're not putting on the table up front. So those become a little more interesting, and a lot of the strategy around those is trying to see where there's value in the assets and capabilities you have, and who might perceive that as value and be able to extract that value. And then, that one is where you get these kind of crazy multiples and, kind of situations where, companies are getting 30x because, it's not about their financials. It's about some asset that they have.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about meeting rhythms. You talk about that a lot in your writing and in your podcast, and accountability structures that drive both the execution and the enterprise value.
Yeah. I would say, there's probably 4 or 5 things that I fundamentally deal with in just about every account that I work with, and those are on those lists. So the meeting rhythms, for me, is this fundamental idea that strategy is a process, not a document. Meaning, a well-run company has a strategic planning process that allows them to gather information and insight around the market, around customers, about competitors, about trends, and quickly process that into updating their strategic plan and their roadmap. So a well-run company has a set of meeting rhythms that helps them process that information, process new information to update, revise their positioning, their strategy, figuring out, okay, what do we need to change in terms of the moves we're making, and quickly cascade that down into a roadmap or a process by which they can set. Usually we're doing a 90-day plan. Sometimes really high moving industries, we're doing a 30-day plan, but we're then setting a set of priorities, specific, clear, limited set of priorities for leadership to execute on in that time period. So you have to cycle that, right? You need to be really good at, okay, what do we need to focus on 30 days? Do those things for 30 days, come up for air, look around. What new information do we have? Process that. Okay, what's the next set of priorities we should focus on? And having that cycle work really well is a core set of meeting and planning meetings or planning and strategy meetings that we set on a regular basis that align strategy and aligns leadership.
And is that kind of the accountability structure too?
So,
Is it lined up
so
with that?
that so that is dovetails with accountability in the sense that one of the challenges, if you're 10, 20, 30 people, you can kind of wing it, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of, okay, look, we got to get these things done. Okay, you do that, I do this. Like, you can there's enough kind of natural communication and flow that you can figure those things out on the fly. But once you get to, I would say 50, certainly 100 people, like there needs to be a clear organizational design that has clear roles and expectations and role scorecards that make it clear that who does what and how do those things work together to deliver value. So the first job is really figuring out what is the flow, like how do we deliver value as an organization, and then how do we set a set of roles and scorecards against those roles for executing on that process, and then how do we hold people accountable that are going to be in those roles. And for me, it's all expectations, right? Like I need some kind of organizational design, process design, clear expectations, and then performance management, right? It's making sure that everyone is clear what they do and how what they do fits into the bigger picture. And the trick there is that changes, right? As the company changes, as the strategy changes, as we grow, like we're constantly evolving that, and we constantly need to retool those things. So, we can have it dialed in perfectly, and in 90 days, it can be wobbly, right? So we need to have a system by which we continually kind of revise and have that in place.
I'm curious, Bruce, when an executive comes to you at this point, at the 10 million or more point in their journey, are they, where are they in their headspace? Are they ready for this kind of structure you're talking about? Because I'm imagining you're really impacting how they run their company and giving them some guidance and coaching on that. Are they ready for this? And what kind of, do they push back, or what are the reactions you typically get?
Yeah, they bring me in usually because they have some desire. They've identified some kind of delta, right? Like this is where they want to be, and this is where they are, and they're trying to figure out how to bridge that gap. And either because they're not exactly sure how, or they want to do it faster, or they want to reduce the risk of that, or the drama associated with that. Like that's where I come in and help them kind of navigate that journey. And a lot of my job is kind of figuring out how to assess the situation and trying to figure out how much can they change, how much can they take on, right? I kind of have this 80% goals. I want them to be kind of 80% confident of being able to achieve the goals and priorities that we set. Meaning I don't want to be 100%. If they're 100%, it probably means we can take on more, right? We're going to leave cash in the tank at the end of the quarter or the end of the period that we're working within. But I don't want to overly stress them, right? Like letting them take on so much that we know they're going to only accomplish 50% of what we said. That's going to be frustrating, and it's a waste of time, right? We could have spent a lot focusing on fewer things and getting more done. So, I would say usually I'm actually trying to keep it easier the first quarter that I'm working with a client, because they're usually overly ambitious. And so I need to govern them a little bit. And B is I want to get a little bit of a win. Like I don't want to start off a quarter with, having them completely whiff, right? Like they don't get anything done. They took on too many priorities. They got too distracted. So it's a little bit of a dialing this in, but a lot of it's like going to the gym, right? Like I may start out with, okay, let's start with 25-pound dumbbells and we'll kind of see. And then, we're going to move you up when I feel like, hey, these are becoming too easy. I think we can bring it up, and we can cycle it a little bit, and we need to kind of deal with, injuries and things like that come up. Like we need to kind of deal with the situation, but a lot of it is figuring out that pace, but a lot of it is just getting that discipline in place, is getting that regular rhythm of setting goals, having that weekly habit, that daily habit of working through those goals, putting time and energy at it, having a plan, having metrics associated with it. So it's quite similar to the sports metaphor of like, oh, we're going to set goals and we're going to work it. We're going to run plays and we're going to get better at it over time.
I don't know if I should have asked you this to
Yeah.
begin with, or maybe this is the right time to ask you, but on your website and your big calling card is how to scale without the drama, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, tell me what you mean by that.
So the two, I guess, two things that I focus on, or that I think ends up creating a lot of drama inside companies. One is not really being clear on where we're going, right? It's like you have a very vague, like, yeah, we're trying to scale the business. Oh, okay, but like, what does that look like? Like, why are we doing it? What's the reason for it, right? Like, give us, creating some clarity on the long-term outcome. Because I find a lot of teams, I would say we can climb any mountain you want, just not every mountain you want. And I often run into teams where, every person on the team is trying to climb a different mountain, right? They have a different sense of what scale is, what the success is, what the future looks like. And that's just going to fundamentally lead to drama, right? You're going to have, people that are doing things that are not aligned because they have very clear, very, very different ideas of what the future holds or what they're trying to achieve. So I think that's one area that we're really trying to get everyone committed to. And there's a commitment process, right? There's sometimes I'm coming into situations and when we actually start talking about, well, what do you want to achieve? That difference starts coming up. And sometimes it's like, ooh, all right, that's a little different than what I thought we were doing. I need to kind of figure out,
Mhm.
am I really committed to that or I'm not? And sometimes it's, you know what, I'm not, but I'm fine doing this for another year. It's just, I'm not going to be here for 10 years. And sometimes it's like, oh, well, if that's really what we're doing, that's probably not a good fit for me. And we probably need to transition someone out. So, but that's kind of a big part of kind of reducing drama is getting clear on what our goal is. What are we trying to achieve? What mountain are we trying to climb? And then the roles and responsibility are the other areas where I just find that without clear swim lanes and clear role descriptions and functional domains, like people are just stepping on each other's toes, right? They're poor communication. There's lots of miscommunication in terms of clients and delivery, and people just lots of frustration. So clear goals and clear accountability is probably 90% of it. And then a lot of it is we're scaling as an organization, right? Running a business at 10 million is dramatically different than 50 million and 100 million. So what it takes to be a highly effective leader, like, is a different set of skills, different set of strategies, and we've got to kind of grow and evolve and coach people through that journey. And not everyone's going to make it, but we want to have a clear plan for how do we help people operate a much more complicated, bigger company over that process.
So I'd like to just wrap up the conversation, Bruce, with a little bit of a discussion about
Yeah.
thought leadership, because this is Thought Leaders Live. And what you were just talking about strikes a chord with me in terms of thought leadership. Can it also be internal? Can the is there a need for these leaders to really communicate the company culture and where their vision is and how they're going to get there effectively? Do you see that? And so I guess two parts of the question. One, is there a need for these in these scaling organizations for thought leadership internally? And then two, is there a need for it externally? And do you think it should come from the CEO?
Yeah. So in the internal side, well, I'll say for me, thought leadership is very much tied to strategy and very much tied to differentiation. So I think one of the things I talk a lot about is you need to have a strategy, which means you need to have some way of differentiating yourself in the market. And that fundamentally is having a kind of a point of view or an approach or a way in which you're going to win. And so I think thought leadership in that sense is key for being able to communicate to the market. Like, what do we stand for and why are we unique and different from other companies? And why is that valuable to a particular set of customers or prospects? Thought leadership is being able to actually put that out into the space in a way that gets customers or gets prospects to see the unique value and how that's going to help them solve their problems. Internally, communication is one of the biggest challenges around growth, right? Is being clear on, well, what are we trying to do? What is the mountain we're trying to climb? How are we going to be different? What does success look like? What are the metrics that matter? Like, all those things are around communication. And so I think internal sort of thought leadership, or being able to communicate your position, be able to communicate your philosophy, your points of view effectively through the organization, is what's going to create alignment about strategy. And I always say it's, the frontline people execute strategy, not leadership, right? So they need to really understand what the strategy is, how are they unique and different, and how did they actually instantiate that. Um, the other one, I think, in general, I find one of the challenges is as a company scales is how to start to peel away, or how to become less dependent on the founder as driver of the organization, and create thought leadership more broadly in the organization. So a lot of what I end up working with is taking leaders or founders who are kind of the face of the company and figuring out how to build thought leadership throughout the leadership team and throughout the organization, so that they have a company that's not completely dependent on them, which is a huge risk when it comes to evaluations and selling. Also, I mean, I deal with a lot of founders post-exit where we're selling their company and they have to go on to do something next, and creating a solid thought leadership platform around their philosophies, opinions, like where do they want to position the market, and maybe related to the work they're doing. It might be different. We have to build that while they're still in the company. It's much harder to do that post-sale. So, 2-3 years prior, a lot of what I end up doing is helping founders figure out what is that platform they need to build separate from the company that's going to give them a tool that they need to be able to do the next thing, whether it's starting another business or something more mission driven, or it can be very personal, but they have to have that platform, and thought leadership and is a great way of doing that.
I couldn't agree more with you, Bruce. Those are some fantastic points. I really appreciate you coming on the show today. If somebody wants to talk to you, if they're in that $10 million or more range and they want to scale without the drama, how do they get in touch with you, Bruce?
Yeah. So email is bruce@eckfeldt.com. Eckfeldt.com is my website. So I've got a lot of content in there, a lot of information about programs. It has a lot of stuff I've written for Inc. I've got a book coming out called Springboard, which is about thinking about your exit as a springboard to the next thing. So that's on there, and that I'm releasing chapters over the next couple of months. So yeah, a lot of helpful tools there, and ways to contact me, and happy to talk about any of these challenges that people are having.
And I have to give you a plug. I read by the privilege of reading one of the chapters from the book, and it is really good stuff. So really excited for you, Bruce, with this book. That's a huge accomplishment. And thank you again for joining us today. And thanks to everybody for being with us.
Thanks, Greg. It's a pleasure.